we've got a very exciting episode, as I was saying, on our detection engineering dispatch series. We are in the thick of what's been a very crazy, very eventful summer here in this space. Again, I'm Alex, your dispatch host, bringing you the latest of topics, content, and today discussion, which if you enjoy and you want to stay in the loop, please subscribe to our email list and join us here live bi-weekly or catch the replays on our YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about, quite frankly, a very rather controversial topic. People are very pressed about it on Twitter and such, right? And that is the topic of AI chatbots, right? Specifically for security. And so I'm joined with a very special guest who we've at Anvologic have been following for quite some time. He's the author of the Curious AI newsletter, which if you haven't followed, subscribed, definitely do that. I think we're on his 33rd issue. This is the amazing Oliver Rochford. So if you guys, again, haven't been following the Curious AI newsletter, just wanted to show you, he's got a very unique way of creating content, right? And on Dispatch, we love, new ways of doing things, and it just disrupts like the long old, like thought leadership kind of opinionated pieces. So he curates AI pieces, all the articles, gets them together, right? Gives kind of like a superlatives on them, most predictable, most cool, right? And then extracts the sentiment, right? Like kind of like how AI does that with sentiment analysis. And then of course provides, a very concise summary in case you want to read it, right? And in the time of where like information consumption is just like so weird and just watered down and just, creative formatting really is the way to go. So I can't speak highly enough about Oliver. So thank you, Oliver, for joining our podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Of course. And I always like to ask, how did you wind up in this space? I know you've done a ton of things. You were previously also at Gartner.
Yeah, I mean, so I originally started out as a Linux system administrator, and I had like I was working for a game hosting company, and we were getting hacked a lot. And so I started getting into the security topic, and in 2001, based off of that, I was asked in Germany to try hacking for dummies. And that really kind of kicked off, I would say, made me from a normal consultant into someone who was, it just gives you a little bit of extra credibility. I've worked as a pen tester, I've run SOCs, I've moved into more strategic roles. As you mentioned, I was at Gartner where I covered the SIM Magic Quadrant, and I coined the term SOAR with Paul Proctor.
Oh, wow.
So that's my little claim to fame. I made a category, but it's not, you don't really make it. You're just the one who gets to decide ultimately what it's called. I think that's the way I'd look at it, which is still quite nice.
I think that's
and in the meantime, yeah, and my right, what's my right to play here, aside from the fact that I'm a market analyst, is that I've worked for various data science, data engineering teams over the past 5 years. I was normally a security subject matter expert, basically someone who designs a product strategy for bringing AI to security operations market. And in the meantime, I am pretty much self-employed like that. I work with a number of different companies. Auguria is one I'm working with right now, who are doing heavy AI work, and also advise a number of other different vendors and also end users on really future-proofing their security operations, what to do with AI, where's this all going?
Absolutely. And now you're talking all about AI all the time. And as every vendor is really at the RSA, at Black Hat coming up here soon. I would bet money. Well, no, I shouldn't be betting any more money, but I would bet that there's no booth or any vendor right now that doesn't have AI on their website.
It is, but at that point, I mean, see, that's an interesting point you make, because there was this point in the 70s when everybody started putting basically processors, microprocessors into their product. It lasted for about 2 years, because afterwards it was like just expected that you'd have basically an electronic toothbrush or something. It was just expected. I think we're going to reach that saturation point really quickly.
Yeah. And we're already there. I mean, we're already in Silicon Valley. We're already trusting AI to take us to work. Have you tried one of those cards while you were in SF recently?
I saw people doing it. People were taking, I had friends who rode one just to take a video of them riding one,
Well, today we're going to be focused on, in particular, AI chatbots, right? Well, that's kind of what's hot right now, and in terms of, well, after following the release of Copilot this year, and then with the grand showcase of Keanu with Precision AI and Charlotte AI, I think that was last year with this NASCAR theme, and then a Monty Copilot as well. We just are on our second generation of this Gen AI concept, and specifically in SecOps, right? Security operations, and this idea of a conversational experience of being able to, have a buddy and ask them questions, and then at the core, them, use their DNA, their LLM, their large language model to automate what can be very boring stuff, right? And that experience, but as it relates to security, is it actually proving useful? Because in a way, they're all kind of trying to do that, right, in one way or another. And we're not going to bash anybody here today, but I'm just saying, where we can focus on is talk about some areas where it could be a valuable experience for SecOps, right? Maybe across different personas, and also what our listeners should be wary about and take careful consideration of as they're putting in their prompts. So the good, the bad, the ugly. What we can do is start with the good stuff. So what would you say, Oliver? What do you think? What are the core functionalities, right, or characteristics of AI chatbots, but really, I guess, LLMs that make them valuable in a cybersecurity context? Has there been anything that you've been crazily impressed by?
I mean, so I have to say that the chatbot aspect, I think, is fairly. So there are two ways of doing a chatbot. You just basically take a chatbot, give it access to your data, and I think that's what almost everyone has done. It's fairly easy to do. What I found is that you really need to understand, like Copilot is a good example. You mentioned Rue. In his examples, he showed that you can't just say, show me the vulnerable hosts. You have to actually understand what the solution calls things. Yeah. So there's almost prompt engineering knowledge required. You need to have a really in-depth knowledge of how the solution views the world. I think that's a really lightweight implementation. In fact, some of the companies I'm doing work with did that in a day. I've seen a couple of deeper implementations. Shinobi Security, they're a stealth startup, for example, where they've actually given their chatbot more of an integrated awareness of the data model. So you can do more natural language stuff. It is able to say, if I call it hosts and the system calls it assets, it's able to translate that. And I think that's rarer. That is the value of it as a user interface, natural language. However, at the same time, as a SOC user, as a very technical user, query languages have some advantages towards natural language, and I'm waiting to see that combination of the two. So chatbots wise, I don't think it's had the impact people have expected, partially because it's a party trick. It was quick to do, it was quick to show off. But in terms of value, I think if you're a younger member, you will use it for a while. If you have to keep using it, maybe the solution is badly designed. If you've designed the security solution where your users can't find out anything, I don't know who's to blame. Maybe the solution, if you ask me. I think that's part of the problem. And knowing which questions to ask requires a skilled user. So the chatbots have not solved that junior bootstrapping problem, because you still need to have a junior who is aware enough to know what to ask. You don't know what you don't know. So I think in that regard, the chatbot aspect is a bit which excites me the least, purely because in a SOC, I think most SOC users are quicker, same as you are with keyboard shortcut. They're harder to learn. Once you learn them, you are much more efficient. Chatbots actually seem to be quite a slow way to interact with data if you know what you're looking for. And if you don't, I think that trial and error as a recommendation system, almost like an interactive knowledge base, that to me is a much stronger use case. Where I've seen real promise for LLMs in general, and people are going to be a bit more surprised around this, but I don't think they should be, because you have a slide in this deck where we spoke, I think where Gartner released a note where it says, when not to use generative AI. And if you haven't seen it, there's this fantastic matrix that all of these machine learning AI technologies, supervised, unsupervised, deep learning. And on the other side, it tells you use cases like decision intelligence, automation, data analysis. Well, for LLMs and Gen AI, decision intelligence and automation is actually low suitability, because it doesn't reason. It's the illusion of reason. But it is really, it's really good at dealing with tech. And so what I've liked seeing is people actually using it to do great report summaries. If you feed it very selective data, it does a grand job of summarizing it. It won't hallucinate if you control the data that goes in. For parsing, like to me, not having to hard code regular expressions, filter, syntax rules to be able to detect every single use case is amazing. So to give you an example, you could, for example, say to an LLM, okay, I've got, so here's an IP address. Tell me if this IP address is public, private, or something else. And that's the simplest use case. And it will basically come back and say, well, it's a public IP address. And if you extrapolate that to larger knowledge areas where you can say, okay, what can you tell me about this log? You can get quite interesting information back. So I think if you use it as a text analysis, text parsing tool, it's fantastic. And the ultimate use case for me, the best thing I've seen so far, is if you think of a playbook or detection as code, LLMs are amazing at code. And people think you want to use an LLM and let it automate the responses. The greatest use case I've seen is having a playbook in code, giving it an advisory and having it update the playbook, and then using quite traditional methods like unit testing or actually validation to validate the output. It doesn't sound as cool, but if you had to hard code that, it's impossible. You cannot predict every single way. So I look at it as a dynamic text manipulation, editing, parsing system in that regards. Less visible to the user directly, but you see it because the data that you're being populated is much richer. It's going to get much more interactive. And I think that's the interesting thing, the fact that it's going to just turn everything a lot more interactive and alive, you know.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's some use case where it does make a lot of sense and others not so much. And even at this very early stages, collectively with all of these that are out now and at the early, Gen AI dev, but also the productization, because all of these are, part numbers and you got to buy them. The technical novelty, I feel like across them is not quite there in terms of their use cases. Technical novelty, and what I mean by that, I like the newness of it, like its uniqueness, its originality. It's nothing that we haven't seen before since the post ChatGPT, right? OpenAI, boom. But I think that what they do have in common is productivity. I think that's not to say that there's value that they do deliver across the SOC. For there's so many acronyms, right, of threat detection and response, SOAR, EDR, CNAP, in different areas, right? And you mentioned like query generation. I feel like a lot of these are doing some way or another, and it can really be done well if you really train it well with the schema and can do it faster than the average Joe that's thinking about building a query. Absolutely. And so productivity really, I think, is going to be how it's done well. If you're using it to automate those boring processes, onerous processes that nobody wants to be doing, like that's how we can do it. I think I had, is this the Gartner chart you were talking about?
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. But nevertheless, I think you make an interesting point about productivity, because like there's lots of data coming back that different roles, different professions, different tasks have a different level of productivity gain. One of the biggest pushbacks on code development, for example, is that it's not production grade code. When I was a pen tester, I didn't need production grade code. I needed code now for this one thing. And for that, it's really good. I was the primary user. Error checking didn't need to be a big deal. So it speeds up certain use cases, absolutely. But it's this, does it have reasoning capability, I think, which is tripping people up. That's where it's really good with tech to a degree. And I say to a degree because I use it to do my newsletter. And even with a good prompt, I cannot rely on it. Like I can put in the link, it will not be able to crawl the link, and it will just make up a content based on inference of the link title. I need to know in advance what I'm summarizing. I couldn't blindly trust it, for example. So, and people are hoping that's going to get better. And for full automation, it has to get better. I see some of the data scientists working on this. They're very young. They've never built a production-ready product. I've spoken to 22 vendors trying to build something with LLMs to have anything that's working. The rest are going out to enterprises, and they've got some kind of, I don't know, it's basically a lab project cobbled together with Python. They talk about accuracy rates of 72, 73%, not realizing that we need 99.97% to be able to automate this if you have millions of alerts. And so there's a disconnect there between the people developing these and real world expectation. However, you have an expert user in the middle. It's a productivity tool. It absolutely makes you more competent. I think that's the important thing to take away. And I think it will get more valuable for people as it progresses, we're very early. But 22 companies trying to build an LLM company. I know dozens of vendors who are using LLMs in various parts of their product now to improve that. So it's like a tide that's lifted all boats, and that's the important thing. If the core functionality of what you're offering is just GPT-4, the foundational model, your roadmap is OpenAI's roadmap, and you're praying that your all of your problems are going to be solved by them. I don't know. That seems a little bit shaky to me as a former Gartner analyst. If I'm honest with you, I would have basically probably not invested in that company. But at the same time, like the thing that's important to note is that you can't use a vanilla chatbot. The reason why a vendor's chatbot is really important is because you're not sending your data to a third party. I want that LLM built into your product because essentially I don't want to have to go through there's policies in place which say I'm not allowed to go to another vendor with that data. I'm already allowed to work with you. I think that's one of the advantages. That's underestimated there.
So the value really comes if, a vendor is training it with their own unique set of data, not just saying, oh yeah, we integrate with OpenAI, ChatGPT-4, and then call it a day. We do AI now. There's so much to be said about actual, generation based on your own schema, right? Maybe your own product documentation. If you're using your own product documentation as a primary data source to get more value out of your product, like that's when it becomes a lot more valuable. And I know Gartner says that everyone right now, the likely wins are in marketing and comms and case generation. It is really good for them. But when we think about SecOps use cases like threat anomaly analysis, log monitoring, like code explanation, it doesn't seem like it's I haven't heard much about, oh yeah, this is actually useful. But could it be a trigger point? Like could it be like something that leads you to your next step? Likely it is right now, but it's got a lot more maturing to do.
I think we're seeing the promise of it, right? And if you're able to, if it solves a big enough problem for you and your process includes validation anyway, it's probably really good. You mentioned marketing, like the best data I've seen so far has been actually from Klarna, the payday lender. They said they have saved 10 million using generative AI in marketing, 6 million they said in graphics costs, so basically image generation, 4 million in translation and copywriting and freelancer services. They say they've actually done more marketing because the cost has gone down. That's Jevons paradox. So Jevons paradox says that as the price of something goes down, the usage goes up because it opens up new use cases because of the lower price point. And that's something which they've seemed to have proven. But if you look at the use cases, text generation, customer services, marketing, and I think they're very predictable use cases. And you're right, in security operations, the direct value here so far has been less materialized, if I'm honest with you. It's still in potential,
Absolutely. Use cases that have been proved particularly effective in SecOps, I can speak to two. This is what we're doing with Monty Copilot, and this is at a very high level. And it's when around that from a threat intel analyst perspective, from a detection engineering perspective, maybe they're the same person, maybe they're separate teams, but the aspect of looking at finding or getting the idea of a detection to cook up and build on your own, right? The first piece of it, the CTI, cyber threat intelligence research, looking through what can be 500 reports, right? Or 500 page. I'm not kidding about that number. They're really high report, like in the count of report pages, or looking at the headline and going from like this to actually extracting what it is that you need from it. This can take hours, right? And so it is good for summarization of text, for finding the key point, finding what it is that you need to find to then later, take back and do a feasibility analysis, figure out if you even have the right data source to cook up that detection, and then cooking up the detection, right? I'm probably missing a bunch of steps, but that's the core of what to do. And the really where it can really be helpful is from here to here, right? And then as far as once you kind of know what you want to do, I think not the actual aspect of going and finding it for you, right? Like, because that's something that needs to be done in a query, but bringing that information back, maybe the output of the query and summarizing what happened It's really good at sifting through information. It's good at finding patterns. And if you give it a lot of historical data, maybe it can even add in more, right? And that does lower that time. And then of course, building SPL, SQL, SPL syntax, if you feed it the documentation.
I'm just cooking lunch and listening to the detection engineering dispatch, but give me a second, I'll put my headset in.
Shanae, can you, thank you so much. Wow, he's telling somebody else about detection engineering dispatch. That's great.
Awesome.
And so that's like one use case, incredible here. And we've been testing with this and does it extremely well. The other area is also in the triage piece. And this is where I see also like Charlotte AI and Purple AI and more of kind of the SOAR EDR folks that have their chatbot do is this retrieving of doing actual actions. But this is where it also introduces a lot of risk. It's like, are we actually going to trust it to take a user off the network if, let's say, a false positive happened? Like if they really shouldn't be taken off the network, then that just becomes annoying. So I don't know if I would even go as far as trusting somebody to actually do responsive actions, but when an alert is, generated, just giving me a case summary with key points instead of reading a payload, I would trust it to explain things, decode commands, right? Compare other events in the past. Like I would trust like from here and before that. I wouldn't go as far as trusting it to do things. Would you?
No, and indeed, so the space that I'm kind of following there, this fully autonomous AI SecOps stuff, none of them are fully autonomous. All of them. So I can tell you, I have like I've spoken to or like researched most of the vendors. They all have the same approach. They have basically a static dashboard. An alert comes in, a high fidelity alert, because you cannot throw thousands of alerts at an LLM. It will make you poor. You will automate yourself into poverty. So we need to pre-qualify the alerts in some way. And then there's a bunch of LLM AI stuff in the background to populate that report. And what they give you is recommendations. But they expect a human to be in the loop because ultimately we know it's still not 100% there. And even if you still probably want that validation built into it. So you're right. I don't think many people are actually fully automating it in the moment at all. But it does get you much quicker to that step. And I find it interesting that you're doing this because I think that in reality a standalone AI copilot LLM chatbot doesn't really make a lot of sense because everything that you need to enable it is what a traditional SIM, SOAR, security operations platform already has. Essentially a retrieval, a RAG system for security looks very much like a combination of a SIM and a SOAR.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think, the dirty little secret in this, that it's not as simply as just throwing random data at the LLM. You have to build this entire infrastructure. And also we're going to have to optimize it. It has to be very, to keep the costs down, we're going to have to get much better at getting data into the kind of shape that AI expect. It's not really a replacement for good data. I think that's the other thing. But love this. This is really awesome because I think you're showing the true value of it, making that automation far more intrinsic to every security solution, not so bolted on, but just part of the work.
The cost piece is I'm saving it for the bad because I haven't found anywhere where the cost of these things have been good or the sentiment has been good. Quite the opposite. But overall, I think it's a lot of what these guys are doing, Charlotte and Monty, and a lot of them is proven useful. As far as though they do need to get better, a lot of the prompts, I know they hit Twitter a while ago, like really terrible responses that have been generated, like so far off, like I don't even know where they were getting some of the data from. I feel like it's okay, at least this early on in the process, that's obviously expected to get better, right? So I'm taking that lightly in terms of how terrible the responses may be, at least this early on, because the maturity will get there. But as far as the timeline, though, once it does, where do you say you would see the most innovative potential in the space?
I mean, so what I expect to see over the next 5 years, and so my assumption is not we're going to reach AGI. I'm sorry. Even if that is possible, there are constraints for data, energy, hardware, even cooling water, which all solvable. None of them are solvable in 5 years. A nuclear power station, the quickest anyone's managed to build it is 6 years. There's 450 worldwide. We need to build about 500 of these things, like 10 per data set. So it's crazy. But at the same time, let's assume we fix some of these issues, because what you're like, part of the problem right now is that the data we're putting into it, the whole infrastructure is not optimized for it. There's this whole trend in that space around basically what's called, grounding, basically LLM models and Gen AI models. We need to have things like knowledge graph ontologies so that it doesn't just try to make stuff up. It should have a ground truth, and it should work upward from that. And it's not actually that easy to do. A lot of companies want to do this right now, but they've never really prepared their data for this. This is like turning into a data-driven, knowledge-driven company takes time. Uber have taken 8 years. They just last week published a fantastic article where they explained the AI journey, and they are pretty much focused on that. If they took 8 years for an AI transformation, I'd say the average enterprise, they're not going to be as agile as Uber, might take 10. And so you can imagine this is a lot big, just to get your ducks in a row to be able to have all of the knowledge in space. Because some of the vendors I speak to, they think they can solve everything with AI, but part of the problem is knowledge acquisition. The documentation doesn't exist. So we have to get better at what's called knowledge engineering. And knowledge engineering is the theory of how do you codify and formalize this knowledge, because the model still needs to be trained and you still need to capture your personal data. Once we get that in a row, I expect to see basically a boost across everywhere. You're going to see semi-automated components all over the place, autonomous stuff to the point where you're going to have a model which will know how to deal with certain circumstances, and it will ask a cleverer model, or a human if it doesn't. We're talking about federated language models in the moment, where you have a purpose-built small language model, maybe on the endpoint, like GPT. Brought out GPT Mini today, which is going to replace GPT 3.5. It's far cheaper to run, apparently, and still very good. But we need to get onto the endpoint. And then you can have something that's very specialized, maybe on processes, which will make a decision, but ask a large language model, was that decision correctly? Because you can see everything out. Once you get that combination, there's going to be a lot more going on underneath the bonnet. But that's the interesting thing. For a user, you're going to have an interface, stuff is going to flash up. It's just that the way that decision to the flashing, to the reporting, is going to be far quicker, far more automated, less hands-on, with less maintenance and overheads, recommendation systems, self-healing systems, onboarding system. My ideal SIM, you onboard all of the data and the SIM says, here's what you've got, here's what you can see, here's what you've got missing. If I were you, this is what I'd buy next, because it would give you the most amount of visibility across this, this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
Or all other users who are using this have this enabled. Wouldn't you like it enabled? That's the kind of recommendation interactive system we're going to start seeing, and it's going to come in increments. None of this is going to come overnight.
Would you say like next 10 years, 5-ish?
So let's play a game. As a futurist, like there's a very simple model where you just have different assumptions. Let's say there's one assumption where within 10 years we're going to have AGI. That one we don't need to extrapolate. It's the singularity, and the technological singularity says it's so messed up you can't predict what happens afterwards. If that's the case, it doesn't matter if I'm wrong. People will be busy with others. Let's assume we can automate 50% within the next 5 years. What would the world look like if we can automate 50% of a lot of the hands-on work that we're doing now, parser building, engineering building? And I don't think we can get rid of it completely. There's a human element in that aspect where you learn to do the analysis and so on. But let's say we improve that to a great degree. It's going to be a completely different world. Attacks are going to be faster. Defense is going to be faster. Humans are going to be pulled into the loop basically when an unknown situation arises. And of course, at the point where, to me, it seems crazy to think of a security operations system when you have a self-healing AI. The AI will have security operations capabilities baked in. That's the future we're looking at. Basically, everything is going to be far smarter. There's going to be semi-autonomous agents built into that component. And what's going to be far more important is identity, because once you delegate your basically rights to a piece of software, that needs to be, policed in some way, and that's going to be the next attack vector. How can I circumvent how your agent is programmed? That's going to be the next level, and it will be agent versus agent, with humans just a bit like in the military theory now, where you have a human controller and you have basically a swarm of drones. Imagine that with a security SOC system where you have a human operator and they have all of these semi-autonomous agents who are coming back to him, and it's delegated via a couple of master agents. But it's going to be a synergy, right? That that is going to be far more intense, I think, for the user. They're going to feel far more integrated sensory-wise during that time, and there's going to be less of us. That's it. Yeah.
I think realistic, the most realistic and innovative potential in the soon time being can be around tuning. And even if it just gives suggestions and guides for what one should think about, what to consider, that can launch a lot of trigger points, right? Ways to keep things healthy, might trigger that next step. It doesn't have to be like, hey, tune this entire thing for me automatically. Actually, Monty can do that, or Amvelogic can do that. But if you could, but that's the thing. It's like you're spending so much time thinking about how to tune things. Maybe you're spending hours tuning Fridays on how to tune. But if you're just given some help, some guide, some very helpful guidance around what to think about in terms of that schema, that property, I think that could go such a long way for a user that's just knocking their head thinking about how to tune something and not making much progress from a user and practitioner perspective. But from a vendor perspective, I think if MSSPs, I don't talk to too much of them, but I think if they really did it right, they can really leverage a lot of their client data in a way that's safe, right? But if they can figure out how to harvest good content, good queries, right? Enough syntax learning, they can really leverage it on their own to be more useful and effective at delivering their services to their customers.
Mhm.
So I don't know if
personalization, right? It's hard for a human being to pick up that context of a company, especially because a lot of it is based on a very technical level. When I worked in a SOC for a large MSSP, there was a lot of guesswork because we just didn't really, like, you're monitoring 100 customers, a couple of them you're going to get to know better. The rest, to be honest with you, it's only when something pops up, and you're always second guessing because you only have partial visibility. Being able to query an agent that kind of puts a barrier between you and them, keeps their data safe, but is able to basically give you the data that you need to respond, will be very powerful. Personalization is going to be a huge impact of this across the value chain, like on the attacker side, on the defender side, when you're buying a product, when you're using a product.
Absolutely. So we talked about the good, the innovative potential, the great, how it can be done. But of course, now the bad. There's many people in and outside of tech that are obviously making fun of chatbots. They say that they suck. I was researching yesterday on Reddit, and I won't say who the vendor was with this chatbot, but they would go as far as saying that it persistently acts contrary to instructions. It's utterly appalling. It causes extreme frustration. It seems to actually derive pleasure from causing distress based on a lot of sarcastic responses that it has. But yet they're being forced on everybody, like, via absurd use cases. I have yet to see an absurd use case that is as this bad. But would you say that there's any use cases that it doesn't make a lot of sense for a chatbot to do or for an LLM to do that are being forced down for us to do?
Wow, I mean, so in the area of security, right? I think that, like, everyone has put a gratuitous chatbot into it, whether they need it or not, and most vendors are struggling. Like, usage went up, and then it trailed off because the novelty wore off if it wasn't done well. So I think that alone, there was a rush to do that, which I, as a security person, think distracted some vendors from actually adding useful stuff. That is, I think, the annoying thing. The fact, did it add value to say me too? No, probably not. So that alone, just integrating the chatbot without having fully developed it, was not good for the user. If that was your first interaction with that chatbot, it will have tainted your experience.
Yeah.
And so rushing to market, if it's not very good, and keep in mind a whole bunch of companies pulled theirs when it did badly. I don't know what prompted that, if I'm honest with you. I don't think it was beneficial for the user itself. The other thing is just stuff which basically, like, I'll give you my favorite example on Canva. Canva have this crazy thing where apparently you can turn a presentation into a Word doc. It's a copy and paste.
Wait, hold on. We love Canva here, so
I love Canva too. I pay privately for Canva, but that was a terrible tool because it did a copy and paste and put it into document, and it probably cost several dollars, and I don't know how much water and electricity for something which really did not add a lot of value. It just scraped the text off of the deck and put it onto a different format. And those kind of thingies, no, it doesn't add a lot of value unless it actually adds something new to it, right? But that's the rush to market. That's people just trying to get something out. So right now, but in security, like so what you mentioned here, for example, enabling existing capabilities, making those better, fantastic application use. I think the remainder, most of what people are probably doing beyond that in the moment is just too early. And there's one feedback point which I've heard from 3 people that just sticks with me, that their teams, they're building something to solve, and they look and somebody else has just released an open source library that does it better. They're never willing to stop in the moment because it's too early. And I think that's the case. And here it's a matter of what works now with how it is. If your solution is or features dependent on GPT-5, you should have probably waited.
Yeah. That's true. That's very true.
That's probably the gist of it. What works now and what's an acceptable margin of error? Because we've been burnt in the security industry. We've had AI since day one. We've had Bayesian rules, spam assassin back in 25 years ago. We've had unsupervised machine learning for anomaly detection. We've had supervised machine learning for malware detection. And all of them have been the equivalent of an MRI scanner to an X-ray. And what I mean by that is MRI scanners did not displace X-rays. They're in addition, they show you something that X-rays don't. X-rays are much simpler. MRI scanners are more expensive to maintain, more expensive to build. They need expertise to run. We don't send every patient to an MRI scanner. 80% of our security users are not looking for an MRI scanner. They can't deal with the X-rays. They're not looking for another solution. What they're looking for is automation. That's where I want to see people focus on. And what I've seen them focus on is the stuff which basically probably hasn't really made people's workflows shorter. It's these mini automations, as you're saying here now, sifting through large volumes of data. That's what takes time for a human. That's where it's really well applied. Is it as cool as something talking to you? No, but it saves me money. It might do my job better. And as a security person, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not buying AI. I'm buying a security tool. If AI is included and it does better security, yay. If not, yeah.
I think that's the highest area of concern is their longevity, but also their pricing models. I told you we've been following what's his name? Rue Campbell.
Yeah.
He made a thread to test, one of the co-pilots that were released earlier this year, and he tested a couple different use cases and just look through the response. And again, if you're not following Rue Campbell, you definitely should. I think he reviews a lot of Microsoft products like Intune, Entra ID, etc. RueCamp 365 on Twitter. But where some of these, prompts have been proven useful, here he asks, can Defender track changes to local administrators? Who's in the group? Can you give me the KQL for this? Again, back to what you were saying on prompt engineering, I probably would have asked this a little bit differently because, you kind of have to give it some context, like, use Defender, right? And I would have asked this a little bit differently. But the idea is he's trying to use just simple English to see what it will come back with. And then nesting 2 questions in a prompt, I don't know if I would do that. But he basically asked, can you give me a KQL for said use case, right? It seemed pretty good, right? But as he kept going on in the thread, he asked, asking context, like, oh, well, I want to know what other users are logging into said devices. Are there any signs? Like, he's doing this primarily for triage. And don't get me wrong, if I don't have to go to 10 different tabs to triage an alert, I think that's a good day for me. Right. So I think that's what he was kind of testing here. And the response was not bad. It's kind of like, it piped back, yes, here's all of the users that logged into this device. Here are all the different logon types, some of them interactive. Here's some of the schedule tabs. It did it quite well, but it also did it not so well, right? And I mean, obviously not crapping on anybody here, because obviously this piece is going to get better over time. But what I am very concerned with is that just to run, all of these little use cases that he did, it cost 15.7, right, resource units, rounded to $64 just to run those things. And if you had a team and you did the calculation across your team, that's 46K, right, a month. There maybe they'll make changes to this pricing model, maybe not, but that's hard to justify a full-time employee to pay someone to do this instead. But I feel like that has always been the thing, right? It's struggling to match the cost against any metric that shows an increase in efficiency or productivity, right? These are metrics that have always been hard to do and to provide, right? Benefit in terms of showing the benefit to actual security. I don't know if anyone has figured it out. Like, I really don't.
I mean, yeah, and it's interesting because where's this budget going to come from? If you ask me, people are looking to AI to save costs, not to spend more, and that is part of the either has to save you time or money, or stop you being, breached, which is a completely different problem. But you're absolutely correct, and the price is going to go down. But right now, the economics aren't really realistic to scale this up. How long it's going to take to actually reduce the price, we don't know, because if you think of $40,000 a month, and for what this is not replacing a person, nowhere near, right? I have seen one of the AI vendors, like one of the full automation LLM-based vendors, they're looking at charging around $20,000 a year for 4,000 investigations, which I think is much easier to quantify. It's about how much a junior analyst would do. That's a pretty good price, but it doesn't tell you what it can't do. It doesn't fully replace a person who's far more versatile. And so you're right, the cost aspect is a huge inhibitor. I've spoken to companies who are unsure of how to price this, which gives you an indicator, because what's the ROI? Yeah. If you look at this particular example, because to me, how would I like this to see? I would like to be in my sim, I would like to start typing, and I would like the AI to start saying, oh, I can see you're doing this type of investigation. I'm going to start prefetching data for you. And if I say something, start doing an investigation with ransomware, I want it to know what it needs to pull together. If I'm telling it what to do, this is just a really clumsy way to interact with the data. And there's probably simpler ways, clicking, query languages, or whatever. It has to also infer what you're asking it to do. That has to be a part of the future, or it's not going to add much value at all, if it's just a complicated way of basically running a query.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're almost at the top of the hour. And I think the general consumption for our listeners today is take a balanced approach for Gen AI chatbots, right? Give them patience for some of these responses. I mean, some of these responses are going to come. They're going to come. I know that at the beginning they were quite shit, but obviously this is going to get better over time. And as far as the actual meaningful ways for them to provide value to the SOC, that's where we should be taking a balanced approach. I think that the promise is there. Maturity is not, right? Beware of the hallucinations, of course, the pricing models, but it's still good to have a healthy level of paranoia when we think about what we're inputting it as in terms of prompts. And definitely follow Oliver in case you haven't. So Oliver, closing cue. How can our listeners, I know you're on top of all of the AI news, but how can our listeners stay informed about the latest trends and advancements in AI in this space?
I mean, so generally, look, if you're looking at the broader actual picture, right? I'm crazy. I've got Google Alert notifications running and everything for this, because this is my job. At the same time, like, of course, you can follow my newsletter. I think there's some cybersecurity aspect to it, but it is more focused on the economics, on the social impact, on the work impact. So what I actually like following, it's TechMeme. It's a website from Silicon Valley. A lot of the venture capitalists, the VCs follow that, and it has very good up-to-date AI information on it. So that's one thing where I think it's almost like a watering hole, where you can get very up-to-date, very in-depth information itself. But if you're really interested in something, set yourself some alerts. I love Google Alerts, because you can actually combine different keywords, and cybersecurity and LLM is a very good one. It's very specific.
Oh, look at that. I was wondering ChatGPT to give you all of your articles.
No. I curate it. I read all of these articles and I pick the
Okay.
ones I use to summarize them, and I still validate this because I don't just want to blindly do it. It has to, there has to be some sense to it. But yeah, it looks, this is a really hard topic to stay on top of in the moment. It is constantly shifting and changing. Half of the companies who start off doing one thing in that space, 3 months later, they're trying to do something else. They're all trying to find. I joke. I've never seen so many startup teams that have no idea what to build. They're veteran company builders. They all have funding. None of them, they're all out looking for a problem for their solution. And that's quite interesting. I would put my money on incumbent vendors in this space to use it to add more value. I'm not sure how many brand new businesses it's going to build.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a lot to look out for in the space. Definitely look out for what's coming. And in terms of case generation, I'm sorry, in terms of detection generation, I think that Monty Copilot, or I would say Gen AI, is at the purview of a lot of like the big companies, but I think the startups, the smaller startups, are making use cases that are actually a little bit more effective. Stay in the loop with what Monty Copilot is doing in terms of coming up with new ideas, new detections to cook up. I think detection engineering is really the core of Ambilogic, and Monty Copilot will be, a lot of the focus will be around a lot of that. So definitely something to look out for. And Oliver, I really appreciate you coming on the show and all of the incredible insight that you provided. You're always welcome back whenever you'd like. Thank you so much for coming, and stay tuned for our next Detection Dispatch episode. Our Purple team will be showcasing all of the top attacks thus far at this mid-year, and going through different ways that you can detect against them, circumvent them. So I will see you guys all next time. Oliver, have a wonderful night. I know it's almost 9 in the UK, and have a lovely week.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Oliver.
Everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.